We are gathered here today for the second Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. The academic procession is about to enter the hall, and we will commence today's oration. I request all of you to keep your mobile phones in silent mode during this event. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. We are gathered here today for the second Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. Professor Carlo Fonseka, whom we commemorate with an oration in Medical Humanities, was an academic, teacher, connoisseur of the arts, lyricist, philosopher, and political intellectual. Above all, he was a free thinker and a humanist. The inaugural Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration was delivered in 2021 by Emeritus Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, and today the second oration will be delivered by Professor Anoja Fernando, Emeritus Professor of Pharmacology, University of Rwanda. We are indeed very pleased to have with us today our chief guest, the Vice Chancellor of the Faculty of Medicine, Vice Chancellor of University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne. Today, to commence today's proceedings, may I now request everyone to stand at their seats for the national anthem. We start today's proceedings with the lighting of the traditional oil lamp. For this ritual, may I kindly invite the Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Vidya Jyoti, Professor Vajra Disanayake, Professor Anuja Fernando, Emeritus Professor of Pharmacology, University of Ruhuna, and our orator today, Mrs. Pearl Fonseka, the beloved wife of Professor Carlo Fonseka, Professor Priyadarshini Galapati, the Head of Department of Medical Humanities, Professor Panduka Karunanayaka, Chairperson of the Humanities Society and Professionalism Stream, Professor Saroj Jaisinghe, Emeritus Professor of Medicine, University of Colombo, Founder Head of the Department of Medical Humanities, and the inaugural orator of the Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities, Mr. H.M.W.G. Bandara, Deputy Registrar of the Faculty, and Mrs. Himani Rajapaksha, Senior Assistant Bursar of the Faculty. Thank you. Thank you. Now, Dr. Santoshi Amarasuriya, Senior Lecturer of the Department of Medical Humanities, will present a bouquet of flowers to Mrs. Pearl Fonseka to share our love and affection with the family of Professor Carlo Fonseka. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to invite the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Vidya Jyoti, Professor Vajra Disanayake, to address the gathering. Sir, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, Mrs. Fonseka, the wife of the late Professor Carlo Fonseka, Emeritus Professor Anuja Fernando, the Professor Carlo Fonseka Orator in Medical Humanities for the year 2022, Professor Priyadarshini Galapati, the Head of the Department of Medical Humanities, Professor Saroj Jaisinghe, the Founder Head, Mr. Bandara, the Deputy Registrar of the Faculty of Medicine, my colleagues in the faculty, both academic and non-academic, distinguished invitees, members of the family of Professor Carlo Fonseka, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to the Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities for the year 2022. We had the inaugural oration last year with our founder head of the Department of Medical Humanities, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, talking about the life and times of Professor Carlo Fonseka. This year, when we had the difficult task of selecting the orator, the unanimous choice of the committee was Professor Anuja Fernando. I wholeheartedly agreed with that decision because I have had the pleasure of associating with Professor Anuja Fernando for more than 2 decades, madam. Even while a medical student in Colombo and she a lecturer, a professor in the Faculty of Medicine, Ruhuna, I think our common meeting ground was the Sri Lanka Medical Association because I, as a student, used to go to the association a lot. And then thereafter, soon after I graduated, I became a member of the council of the SLMA. And then very often I would meet Professor Anuja Fernando. I know that there is going to be a formal citation of her, but I think I would like to add a little bit of a personal touch to one of the great alumni of our faculty. As you said in the morning, madam, when the Vice Chancellor asked you, you were in Ruhuna, you said, no, I'm in Colombo. So I replied back by saying, you know, heart is in Colombo, worked in Ruhuna, because that's what Professor Anuja Fernando was. She brought in the various aspects of medical humanities to the work that she did in the Sri Lanka Medical Association. I should say the work that she did through the Sri Lanka Medical Association, especially in the field of medical ethics and bioethics. And if you go back to the history of the past 20 years in the Sri Lanka Medical Association, Professor Anuja Fernando's stamp of approval or leadership is there in every aspect of what we did in the Sri Lanka Medical Association. And that is something that has actually stood the test of time. And on a personal note, I've been very lucky to have been associated with her in that journey, the journey that she started in the form of setting up a forum for ethics review committees in Sri Lanka. We formalized it together in 2010 with the setting up of the Forum for Ethics Review Committees in Sri Lanka as a formal entity. And then, of course, Professor Anuja Fernando goes back to a decade before when she was instrumental in setting up the Forum for Ethics Review Committees in Asia and the Western Pacific at a time when I think no one in Sri Lanka would have actually thought of getting involved in an initiative like that. And that led to formation of our own forum. And of course, formalizing of a lot of activities. Today we have all medical faculties with ethics review committees which have been recognized by the Forum for Ethics Review Committees in Asia and the Western Pacific. And 2012, when I was the president of the Sri Lanka Medical Association, I had the opportunity of felicitating Professor Anuja Fernando when we had the FIRCAP International Conference in Sri Lanka for the first and only time so far. Going back, I think I can vividly remember, Madam, the oration, oration of the at the SLAS that you gave on the humanities education work that you did in Ruhuna, touching that was the Kotegoda oration of the SLAS, and I think that was my own introduction to the work that you have done in humanities, and I think that's pioneering work, and that led to the inspiration which Professor Sarojai Singha took in the form of setting up the Department of Medical Humanities here. And of course, as we go on, I know I don't want to steal the thunder from the department. There will be further announcements in the very soon. But this is not just an initiative which began here in the faculty, but it will grow regional and global as in the next few years. And I firmly wish that aspirations would be fulfilled. And I will, from my part, give the fullest support for that. Coming back to to Professor Carlo Fonseka, the great humanist, I think we could call him. We are celebrating his life today, and I think it is fortunate that the Faculty of Medicine was able to institute this oration. Before, a lot of others would have claimed him. I think there are lots of others who benefited from him and would have claimed his legacy, and we in the faculty, due to the initiative of Professor Sarojai Singha, was able to institute this oration in our faculty. That meant that the prestige associated with that remains in this faculty, the alma mater of Professor Carlo Fonseka. And I'd like to congratulate and thank Professor Sarojai Singha for his foresight in instituting this oration, sir. So with those words, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for the hard work that they did over the past few months to organize this oration. I'd like to thank the Vice Chancellor for accepting our invitation. I'd like to thank Mrs. Fonseka and her daughter and everyone else for their participation today. Your presence here is a source of inspiration to us. I'd like to thank the limited guests that we invited on site today for their participation as well. And I'd like to welcome all of those who are participating in the oration through Zoom this morning, and I look forward to this oration continuing in the faculty, and I'm sure the future generations in this faculty would nurture this oration and take it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your speech and for that walk down that tender lane of memories. We are indeed very pleased to have with us today our chief guest, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, here at this occasion. I now cordially invite Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, to address the gathering. Over to you, sir.
Very good morning to all. It is my great pleasure and indeed honor to me invite this oration. Actually, we all are aware Professor Carlo Fonseka is very eminent scholar, academic, and of course active political activist, socialist, and many ways we can explain Professor Carlo Fonseka. In that sense, I'm delighted to be here as the Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, Dean of the Faculty, Vidya Jyoti, Senior Professor Vajira Disanayaka, all senior professors, chair professors, professors and other academics, especially Professor Priyadarshini Galapathy, who organized this, and today's orator, Professor Emeritus Professor Anuja Fonseka, and all the distinguished invited today. So it is a landmark day for the Faculty of Medicine, because we, of course, trying to, of course, remember, recollect our memories. It went, I think, decades of these premises. So we know that our specialties in medicine or any other specialties, professors are performing. Of course, they are performers. But when it comes to overall understanding, particularly this, I like to see this political activist part in when I read the Wikipedia. So we see that very important part, because in Sri Lanka, everyone knows Professor Carlo Fonseka because of his voice he raised for the general public, and particularly in Sri Lanka, we know now we are facing a crisis situation. So in a crisis situation, we know that the gap between rich and poor, the inequalities are rising. So for the poor, those who did not have voice, I think Professor Carlo Fonseka's voice was helpful. So in socialist political regime, as well as in Sri Lankan needy people, they could get the support. Actually, if Professor Carlo Fonseka is today, I think he would have spoken on many, many matters which are in the common man's ground. He has been appearing and discussing. So that Madam Fonseka, actually, this is one of the greatest thing we observe in Sri Lanka, because not all academic can go into that extent. We academics, we finish our life as university professors, but going into the society and making a voice for voiceless people is, of course, very important thing. I think in the oration, Professor Anuja Fonseka will explain all these things. So it is, I think, essential thing in a university to remember our distinguished scholars and discuss their characteristics, and we need to learn from the best experiences we had in universities. So learning from best practices is one of the most important things. So it gives more avenues for younger generation, particularly undergraduate, postgraduate, as well as young academics. So therefore, I think today's gathering is very useful. It should continue like that for other professors also, those who contributed much to bring this Faculty of Medicine and the University of Colombo up to this level. So saying that, I would like to stop my small speech. Thank you very much for inviting me. We from the Central in the University of Colombo, Central Administration, always behind you. When you need any time, please let us know. We are highly collaborating with all the faculties, and we, of course, are for you to do our service. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your speech and for your gracious presence here today. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have arrived at the highlight of today's event. Before the commencement of today's oration, may I now call upon Professor Priyadarshini Galapathy, the head of the Department of Medical Humanities, to read out the citation of Emeritus Professor Anuja Fernando, our orator today.
Good morning. Before the citation, actually, I would like, on behalf of the department, to speak a few words and, welcome the guest here. The Department of Medical Humanities actually welcomes all of you who are joining on site as well as online to this event. And in fact, today is a special day for us because today we celebrate the 6th birthday of the Department of Medical Humanities, which was established in 1916 on the 9th of August. Having commemorated Professor Carlo Fonseka on his first death anniversary on the 2nd of September in 2020 and inauguration of the Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration on his birth anniversary on the 4th of March, we have chosen the birthday of the department to honor him with this Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. Professor H.D. Karunaratne, it is my great pleasure to welcome you, sir, to this event. And we are honored and privileged to have you gracing this occasion as our Vice Chancellor. And thank you for attending this event in person despite your busy schedule. And we also warmly welcome Professor Vajira Disanayaka, who has always been supporting all our activities, and we have a lot of plans for the department, and we expect your cooperation, and we know that we will get your fullest support to take the department to greater heights. It is indeed my great personal pleasure to welcome Professor Anuja Fernando, the orator for today, a pharmacologist, but a pioneer in the field of medical humanities, as mentioned by Professor Vajira Disanayaka. And I believe your work in medical humanities would be elaborated during the oration. And we thank you, Madam, for accepting our invitation to deliver this oration. And it is my great pleasure to warmly welcome Mrs. Pearl Fonseka and the family of late Professor Carlo Fonseka. And it has been our pleasure to associate with the family of Professor Carlo Fonseka during the commemorating events that we have held in the faculty previously. The Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities is another unique addition to the activities of the Department of Medical Humanities, which was initiated by Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, as was mentioned, the founder head of the department, who was the inaugural Professor Carlo Fonseka Orator as well. I warmly welcome you, sir, to this oration, and thank you for your continuous vision and the direction given to the department to take it to greater heights despite your retirement from the faculty, and we look forward to that guidance that you give continuously to take this department forward. Also, we welcome all the heads of departments, chair professors on site, Professor Panduka Karuranayaka, the chairperson of the Humanities, Society and Professionalism stream, the HSPS, which has replaced the Behavioral Sciences stream in the faculty, which is conducting all the activities related to medical humanities in the medical curriculum. We are also happy to have all the distinguished invitees whom we have invited for this oration. I particularly thank our audiovisual team led by Dr. Dakshita Wickramasinghe and Dr. Roshan Hevapatirana, who facilitated the live streaming of this event. The field of medical humanities encompasses a wide range of disciplines such as philosophy, literature, social sciences, including clinical cultural studies, anthropology, ethics, and the literary, artistic and literary works to understand the human experience in health and illness. It's a field which is gaining a wide interest in the Western world and considered as an important component of medical education and education of all health-related activities. We are actually very happy that our faculty, under the guidance of Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, has initiated establishing this department not only in our faculty, but is the first in this country as well as in the region. And various forms of art is known to encourage more sensitivity and sensitivity in health professionals, leading to more empathy and compassion. So it is our hope that we could inculcate those values in our students with the activities done through our Humanities, Society and Professionalism stream in the curriculum. And Professor Carlo Fonseka is one of the best examples of a medical personality in our country who has given inspiration to this discipline with his life through the interests he had, such as music, literature, art, and even the other political activities that he engaged in, as enumerated by Vice Chancellor as well. And he was closely linked to the Department of Medical Humanities and delivered the first of the lecture series that was organized by the department, that Professor Saroj Jayasinghe started after the department of initiated in 2016. And Professor Carlo Fonseka was also an excellent role model for the doctors that we aspire to produce with the influence of this new department. And it is with a lot of gratitude that we remember the generous donation that he made to advance the field of medical humanities. So I sincerely hope that the oration that we established in his memory will pave the way for promoting this novel discipline of medical humanities in our faculty, and not only in the faculty but in the country and in our region as well, because this is not present in our region as well. So while celebrating the life of Professor Carlo Fonseka, we hope to engage in that endeavor in the coming years. The public of this country actually knows Professor Carlo Fonseka for the discipline of medical humanities, such as the music, art, cultural studies, which he probably enjoyed as much or more than the discipline of physiology that he taught us in this faculty. So thank you. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Anuja Indrakanti Fernandu, the orator for the second Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration 2022, Emeritus Professor of Pharmacology, University of Ruhuna, Sri Lanka. Professor Anuja Fernandu graduated with MBBS from the University of Ceylon, Colombo in 1969. Having worked as a demonstrator in the Department of Pharmacology, Faculty of Medicine, Colombo for 2 years, she proceeded to the United Kingdom, where she worked as a research registrar in clinical pharmacology at Royal Free and Royal Northern Hospitals in London. During this period, she obtained MRCP UK and a BA degree in Humanities from the Open University in UK. She is also a Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of London, holds a diploma in French language from the Alliance Française of Paris. On her return to Sri Lanka, she was appointed the founder professor of pharmacology in the Faculty of Medicine, University of Ruhuna in 1981, when that new faculty was established at the age of just 36 years. She was the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine from 1990 to 1996, and also served as the acting Vice Chancellor of the University of Ruhuna. At the Faculty of Medicine, Ruhuna, in addition to teaching pharmacology, often as the only teacher in the department, she taught ethics and history of medicine from the very inception of the faculty, and introduced clinical ethics teaching in the wards to students during the professorial appointments. In 2005, she introduced a course on medical humanities to the fourth-year medical students for the first time in Sri Lanka, which was conducted for about 4 batches of students. She served the University of Ruhuna for 30 years until her retirement in 2010. She has several fellowships and scholarships awarded by the WHO, UNESCO, and Association of Commonwealth Universities, and she was awarded a Commonwealth Medical Fellowship to work in the Department of Pharmacology in the University of Oxford, UK. Her publications, presentations locally and internationally cover a wide variety of subjects ranging from pharmacology, medical education, medical ethics, research ethics, and medical humanities. She was the president of SLMA in 2001 and established Women's Health Committee and chaired the SLMA Ethics Committee for over 17 years. She chaired the National Bioethics Committee at the National Science Foundation for several years, during which period bioethics teaching was introduced at several non-medical faculties in Sri Lanka. For the past 25 years, she has been a resource person for training workshops conducted by UNESCO, the Federation of Ethics Review Committees, FERCAP, and the WHO CRO, and she was evaluating ethics review committees in the Asia Pacific region and served in the steering committee of FERCAP for several years. In 2010, she was elected the first woman president of the Asian Bioethics Association. She was also the president of the Sri Lanka Girl Guides Association. In 2016, she was appointed by the Director General of UNESCO to the UNESCO International Bioethics Committee, the first from Sri Lanka, and is currently the second 4-year term. She is a member of the National Health Research Council, Ministry of Health, and Chair Ethics Committee of the National Science Foundation. She has delivered many orations, the E.M. Vijayarama oration and the C.G. Uragoda oration of the SLMA, the inaugural Pulimud Memorial oration of the Visakha Vidyalaya, S.R. Kottegoda oration of the Sri Lanka Association for Advancement of Science, and Valentine Basnaik oration of the Physiological Society of Sri Lanka. So, Madam, it is my personal pleasure and privilege as a pharmacologist and as the current head of the Department of Medical Humanities to invite you to accept the oration medal from the Dean and deliver the second Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. May I now invite Professor Anuja Fernando and the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine to come on stage for the presentation of the medal. Before that, I invite Professor Anuja Fernando to garland the picture of Professor Carlo Fonseka to honor his inimitable life before we present the medal. Thank you, Madam. Now I invite Vidyajyoti Professor Vajira Disanayaka to present the Orator's Medal to Emeritus Professor Anuja Fernando. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together to our orator today, Emeritus Professor Anuja Fernando, and invite her to deliver the second Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. Madam.
Professor H.D. Karunaratne, Vice Chancellor, Professor Vajira Disanayaka, Dean, and members of the Faculty of Medicine, Colombo, Mrs. Pearl Fonseka, and members of the family of the late Professor Carlo Fonseka, Professor Pedashni Galapatti, Head Department of Medical Humanities, friends, colleagues, and former students of the late Professor Carlo Fonseka, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the Dean and staff of the Department of Medical Humanities, Faculty of Medicine, Colombo, for inviting me to deliver the second Professor Carlo Fonseka Memorial Oration in memory of one of the great professors of physiology in Sri Lanka, who was a legend in his lifetime. Today's oration is a tribute to the memory of a much loved and admired teacher, colleague, and mentor who was well known throughout Sri Lanka for his intellectual stature and his spellbinding oratory. He was a scientist who took pride in being a rationalist, a lover of the arts, an occasionally controversial politician, and above all, a person who was not afraid to speak and act with the courage of his convictions. The more tender side of Professor Carlo Fonseka was exemplified in his numerous musical and lyrical compositions, earning him the admiration of thousands of music lovers in this country. He straddled the two cultures of science and the humanities like a colossus. Born on the 4th of March 1933, he was educated at Maris Stella College, Negombo, and St. Joseph's College, Colombo. graduated MBBS from the University of Ceylon, Colombo in 1960, obtaining a first class and winning the Perry exhibition for best performance at the final examination. Opting for an academic career, he obtained his PhD from the University of Edinburgh, returning to the Faculty of Medicine, Colombo in 1967. He served with distinction as a professor of physiology in 2 universities, Colombo and Calonia. He became the founder dean of the newly created Faculty of Medicine at Ragama at a challenging time in its history, and worked tirelessly to establish this faculty on a sound basis, for which he will always be loved and remembered by its students and colleagues. Having held many positions of responsibility in both the medical and non-medical spheres, and being recognized and honored for his contributions to society, he passed away in the fullness of life at the age of 86 years. He is greatly missed by all of us. I did not have the good fortune of having Professor Carlo Fonseka as a teacher when I entered the Colombo Faculty of Medicine in 1964, as he was on study leave at the time. He burst into our orbit during our internship year at the centenary celebrations of the Colombo Faculty in 1970, with his remarkable display of fireworking. And I remember sitting in the front row of the physiology lecture theatre, how he invited the audience to follow his example. I was afraid to volunteer because I could hardly walk on hot sand barefoot without squealing. But my friend got up and ran over the red-hot coals without any mishap, much to the joy of Professor Carlo. I got to know Professor Carlo better when I was a demonstrator in the Department of Pharmacology and took tutorials in physiology too. That gave me a chance to listen to his student lectures, delivered in his inimitable style. The 2 departments were close, both in their physical locations and in their friendship. And all of us, young and old, enjoyed a wonderful sense of camaraderie. Once when I was approaching his room, I heard a loud voice declaiming in measured tones and discovered Professor Carlo alone, rehearsing his lecture to the students, complete with pauses and gestures. That showed his commitment to give of his best, even at an undergraduate lecture. I admired his simplicity and generosity of spirit, which I came to appreciate fully after becoming a founder member of the Physiological Society of Sri Lanka. When I was the 3rd speaker at the A.C. Koch Birth Centenary Memorial Symposium in 2003, I felt some trepidation in having to speak after 2 giants in the field of physiology, Professor Carlo Fonseka and Professor Valentine Bastaiger. Professor Carlo was the first to congratulate me on my presentation and was always unstinting in his praise, which I believe was because he had a kind heart and also probably wanted us to be encouraged in all our endeavors. Professor Carlo was looking forward very much to deliver the Valentine Basnayaka Memorial Oration in November 2019, but sadly passed away on the 2nd of September. I feel very honored to deliver this oration in his memory. Thank you, Professor Galapati, for your kind introduction, and thank you, Professor Vajira, also for your kind words. I believe the reason I'm standing here today on the invitation of the Department of Medical Humanities is because of my interest in this subject and because of what I have done, little as it may be, to introduce the subject to medical students in Sri Lanka. I would like to warmly congratulate the Faculty of Medicine, Colombo, and especially Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, for having the vision and the dedication to enrich medical curriculum by formally establishing a Department of Medical Humanities, the first in Sri Lanka. My talk today will be about the background to the medical humanities and the theme of medicine in literature as a tool for teaching students, while highlighting a rather peculiar phenomenon of the 19th century in Europe, which I have called creative malady. For several years in the recent past, excuse me, the place of the humanities in the medical curriculum has been the subject of some debate. Although the medical humanities is still an emerging field, at least in our part of the world, medicine and the humanities have been linked together since antiquity. We could call it old wine in a new bottle. In fact, for the greater part of human civilization, it is the humanities, which included philosophy, law and logic, that held the position of eminence in society. The prestige enjoyed by science is a much more recent phenomenon. Many great physicians, excuse me a moment, please. Many great physicians of the classical and medieval ages, such as Hippocrates, Maimonides, and Avicenna, were also influential in the arts and humanities, making medicine a part of cultural and intellectual life. Between the mid-16th and the late 17th centuries, however, the great discoveries and advances in understanding the natural world, led by brilliant scientists and natural philosophers such as Galileo Galilei, Isaac Newton, who were called natural philosophers then, and among the physicians, William Harvey, resulted in the scientific revolution of the 17th century. And the humanities were relegated to a secondary position. Natural philosophy, which came to be known as science, maintained that knowledge should be supported with evidence. And this revolutionary way of thinking led to the Age of Enlightenment in 18th century Europe, with its skepticism, rationalism, and loss of faith in God. Since then, science has continued to dominate the world up to the modern era. Medicine followed science in becoming more and more advanced technologically, and with the great advances in laboratory medicine and interest shown for scientific excellence and research, by the end of the 19th century, medicine has become hyper-specialized and somewhat reductionist in its approach, perhaps at the expense of humanistic care and caring. This was demonstrated in the 1910 Flexner Report on Medical Education in the United States and Canada, which emphasized the advancement of knowledge as the highest goal of a physician. Long before medical humanities was introduced into the medical curriculum in the recent past, there have been exemplary teachers and practitioners of medicine who already believed that a combination of the humanities and the sciences would be the ideal. One of the earliest physicians to speak in favor of the humanities was Sir William Osler. Osler, in contrast to the followers of Abraham Flexner, considered the welfare of patients to be the priority. Sir William Osler, a Canadian physician of British parentage, who helped to establish the medical school at Johns Hopkins University as its first professor of medicine, later became Regius Professor of Medicine at the University of Oxford. He was one of the best-loved physicians in the Western world in the early part of the 20th century. In 1919, he was elected the president of the Classical Association, the first physician to be given that honor. In his presidential address to the Classical Association, delivered a few months before his death, he expressed his thoughts on the role of the humanities. This was the era when hormones were being discovered and their actions elucidated. And Osler made several references to hormones. He first described the crucial importance of hormones for the living body, and then painted a picture of what happens to the body when deprived of hormones. For example, how deficiency of thyroxine will result in dementia. And then he compared the humanities to the hormones. I quote, "Now, the men of your guild secrete materials which do for society at large what the thyroid gland does for the individual. The humanities are the hormones. C.P. Snow, British physicist and novelist, in his 1959 Reed lecture at Cambridge, spoke about the two cultures, how scientists and literary intellectuals were separated by a wide gulf of mutual incomprehension. His lecture was controversial because of his obvious bias towards science over the arts and received a backlash from several erudite literary figures. However, one of the more important points he made was that British medical students did not have adequate exposure to the humanities before entering medical school, unlike students in North America and the European continent. He would be happy to know that they do now. Some years later, Jerome Kagan introduced the third culture, the social sciences, comprising sociology, economics, political science, psychology, and anthropology, which needed to be included in the equation. I believe that this debate has finally come to a conclusion, and today most medical educators would agree that the humanities do have a place in the medical curriculum. I would like to let Edmund Pellegrino, a Professor Emeritus of Medicine and Medical Ethics at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, have the last word on this subject. He believed that medicine connects technical and moral questions in its clinical decisions. It is required to be both objective and compassionate. It sits between the sciences and the humanities, being exclusively neither one nor the other, but having some of the qualities of both. Close quote. I remember being invited by you in 2016 to make a presentation on medical humanities, and I spoke on different approaches to teaching the subject, including the very experimental method I had used in the Faculty of Medicine goal to introduce the subject in 2005. The objectives were deliberately kept simple. The aim was to promote empathy with patients, compassionate understanding of individuals in society, and reflective practice in personal development. I started with the hopeful premise that exposure to medical humanities may be instrumental, at least in the simple sense of being likely to produce better doctors. To cut the story short, I presented this work at the AMI conference in 2006, and my conclusions could be summarized as follows. While it was difficult to prove that teaching medical humanities any form to medical students will result in more humane physicians or better cared for patients, I concluded that short didactic lectures are feasible, acceptable, and effective as a preliminary method of introducing medical humanities to undergraduates in a developing Asian country with limited resources. I didn't have any extra resources other than those of the Department of Pharmacology when I introduced this course for 4 years. These were some of the topics covered in the course. All of them were related to medicine in some way, except the lecture demonstration on the music of Mozart. That was meant purely for enjoyment. 3 short pieces were played after suitable introductions, including an English translation of the operatic aria. All 3 were lively pieces. I was careful, I didn't want them to fall asleep. The allegro movements from the horn concerto and the piano concerto number 5 in D major, and the baritone aria, Non più andrai, from the Marriage of Figaro. I was surprised but pleased that the students enjoyed even the operatic aria. I believe that literature is one of the best of the many avenues available to use the humanities in trying to produce a compassionate doctor. The bonds between medicine and literature are seen in many areas. Both disciplines try to understand the human condition. Imaginative or creative literature comprises many forms: novels, plays, poetry, short stories, biographies, memoirs, etc. And they all tell some story. Stories about people's lives enhance our perceptive skills and make us sensitive to the world of others, whether one is a doctor or not. For doctors and medical students, exposure to literature with a medical theme can have added benefits because it can develop or increase empathy towards the patients by making us aware of how people think in different ways, how they respond to illnesses or treatments, perhaps in ways not familiar to us. Literature, by shedding light on the diversity of people's emotions and actions, can challenge our own beliefs and assumptions, and perhaps even make us rethink our own value judgments. Medically themed literature will also give an insight into the history of medicine over the ages. Medical schools that introduce courses on medical humanities into their curricula have found the medicine in literature theme to be one of the most popular in such courses. Some doctors have become famous as fiction writers, for example, Arthur Conan Doyle and Anton Chekhov. Medical authors naturally bring a special insight to their work, and they're often critical of the medical or social systems of their day. On the other hand, some authors who have been invalids or who have encountered medical conditions can enhance the dramatic power of their works by using their own experiences. I now move on to what I have called the creative melody. Requiem by Robert Louis Stevenson. Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me lie. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from sea, and the hunter home from the hill. Requiem is a short, simple, and very moving poem by the Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson, composed specifically to become his own epitaph. The picture shows Stevenson's sarcophagus on top of Mount Weya, the highest mountain in western Samoa, where he is buried, facing the blue Pacific Ocean. The last 3 lines of the poem are engraved on a shiny brass plaque on the sarcophagus. Although suffering from tuberculosis for most of his life, his sudden death on the 3rd of December 1894 at the age of 44 years was probably due to a cerebrovascular accident. The title of the poem, Requiem, means remembrance. The poem indicates how he wanted to be remembered. He did not want to die like a person defeated by death, but as a person who accepted death willingly. He also wanted to be buried in a place he loved, under the open skies. Robert Louis Stevenson was born on November 13, 1850, in Edinburgh, Scotland, the only son of a civil engineer. He suffered from chronic lung disease throughout his life and was often confined to bed. He entered Edinburgh University to study engineering, but was too much of a romantic at heart and had literary ambitions. In later life, he probably had pulmonary tuberculosis, although undiagnosed, and he was very grateful to his doctors who looked after him when ill, expressing his gratitude in the well-known tribute titled Dedication. After his father died, he left the cold climate of Scotland on doctor's orders and traveled the world in search of warmer climes, writing his wonderfully entertaining novels of escape like Treasure Island, Kidnapped, and Black Arrow, with feverish intensity. It is said that he wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in under 3 days after dreaming about that story. Surviving several hemorrhages, he was forever trying to escape the cold and harsh climate of his own country by circumnavigating the globe, with tuberculosis continued to consume him. He and his wife, with her children, finally settled in Western Samoa, where the natives called him Tusitara, teller of tales. Sitting up in bed, suffering sudden hemorrhages, he was resigned and ready to surrender. He wrote every day while he waited, as he himself called it, quote, to be weaned from the passion of life. That is how tuberculosis was viewed in the 19th century. It was the passion of life genius perhaps, consuming the body from within, hence known as consumption. When I finished my internship in medicine with Dr. J.R. Wilson 52 years ago, he gave me and my co-house officers a valuable textbook of medicine to each of us. In the inside front pages, he had thanked us, given his blessings for our future success, and filled the pages with quotations from famous people. This is my favorite. There are men and classes of men that stand above the common herd, the soldier, the sailor, and shepherd not infrequently. The artist rarely, still the clergyman, the physician almost as a rule. He is the flower of our civilization. And he continued. And when the stage of man is done with, only to be marveled in history, he will be thought to have shared but little in the defects of the period, and to have most notably exhibited the virtues of the race. Generosity he has, such as is possible only to those who practice an art, and never to those who drive a trade. Discretion tested by 100 secrets, tact tried in 1,000 embarrassments, and what is more important, Herculean cheerfulness and courage. So is that he brings air and cheer into a sick room, and often enough, though not so often as he desires, brings healing. This slide gives the current global statistics for tuberculosis. Total of 1.5 million. But the leading cause of infectious killers until COVID-19 descended on us. But encouraging it is to see that 66 million lives have been saved between 2000 and 2020. Encouraging as it is, we still have a long way to go in eradicating this disease. This graph shows the mortality rate from TB from 1855 to 1955 in England and Wales. It can be seen that the decline in deaths began well before the development of antibiotics, possibly because of the public health measures, and dropped off almost entirely after antibiotic treatments were available after the Second World War. However, that is in Europe. In developing countries, it's not that encouraging. Tuberculosis is one of the oldest diseases known to mankind and has been described by the Greeks. The medical term used to describe the disease from ancient times until the 18th century was phthisis. The name phthisis comes from the Greek, meaning to decay. Sometimes when a disease is incurable and without a known cause, it could only be interpreted by metaphors, which change as societal values change with time. An example of a metaphor is consumption in the 19th century. Tuberculosis was thought to be related to creative genius and thought to affect aesthetically inclined, pure, intellectual persons with sensitive and nervous dispositions. The poet John Keats embodied the idea of such a person. Keats had been a medical student at Guy's Hospital for about a year, but left with a license to practice as an apothecary. His mother had died of TB when he was 14 years old, and his brother a few years later. Keats was diagnosed as having phthisis, as TB was known then, at the age of 23 years, and died 2 years later. He composed his best poetry during the period just before his death, and Keats' illness, creativity, and early death in 1821 became a central metaphor of consumption in the 19th century. After Koch discovered the bacillus, the disease would be known as tuberculosis. Percy Shelley, another young poet with phthisis, wrote a 55-stanza elegy on the death of Keats. Shelley's Adonais has been acclaimed as one of the greatest English elegies. This is the poem that famously begins, "I weep for Adonis, he is dead." Adonis is the young man in Greek mythology who was loved by Venus. Like a pale flower by some sad maiden cherished and fed with true love tears instead of dew, most musical of mourners, weep anew. The extreme hope, the loveliest and the last, the bloom whose petals nipped before they blew, died on the promise of the fruit, is waste. The broken lily lies, the storm is overpast. The broken lily lies, meaning Keats has died in the prime of his life. Shelley's tribute expressed what would become the central metaphor of consumption in the 19th century, the idea that the body is consumed from within by its passions. In the decades following Keats' death, the illness was said to demonstrate the condition called spes where physical wasting would be accompanied by a flowering of the creative soul. As the body wasted and expired from consumption, this combustion led to the release of creative genius. And this release of genius was responsible for the great outpouring of poetry from Keats during his last years. All this imaginative speculation was because no one knew the cause of the disease. This hypothetical connection between suffering and creative genius made the disease appear rather desirable to some. Keats' poem, La Belle Dame sans Merci, was written the year before he died, and soon after his own brother had died of TB. It is about a dying knight who is apparently enslaved by a cruel and beautiful lady, a fairy queen. But it could also be a description of someone suffering from consumption and knowing he's going to die. La Belle Dame sans Merci, the beautiful lady without mercy, who holds the pale and feverish knight captive, is the disease tuberculosis. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woebegone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose, fast withereth too. The poem appears to describe the pallor, fever, sweating, and the distinctive flush of the consumptive patient. Keats, a former medical student, would have been quite familiar with the symptoms. La Belle Dame is rich in imagery. The knight's struggle with solitude and mortality seems to reflect Keats' own situation of loss of purpose and obscurity. Keats, unlike Robert Louis Stevenson, died virtually unknown. It would take 30 years for his talent to be recognized. During the 19th century, the belief arose that the thigh-sick body is consumed from within by is consumed from within by its passions. Hence the origin of the word consumption for the disease. It was only when the causative organism Mycobacterium tuberculosis was discovered much later in 1882 that the disease became known as tuberculosis. Thus, the period between Keats' death and the discovery of the Mycobacterium, 1821 to 1881, is often referred to as the romantic era of consumption. Many novels, plays, and operas were written during this period, with a consumptive heroine, rarely a hero, as the central character. The signs and symptoms of pulmonary tuberculosis were also rather genteel, where the sufferers became anemic and emaciated, coughing blood delicately into handkerchiefs or pillows before dying gently and romantically. This inspired writers and composers to create romantic works of art on the theme. In this slide, you see some of the literary and musical creations during this era, novels like The Lady of the Camellias by Alexandre Dumas, Les Miserables, Victor Hugo, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, and operas like La Traviata by Verdi and Tales of Hoffmann by Offenbach. In the 19th century, it seemed as if everyone was dying of consumption. The French author Alexandre Dumas, the younger, wrote, rather unkindly, "It was the fashion to suffer from the lungs. Everybody was consumptive, poets especially. It was good form to spit blood after any emotion that was at all sensational and to die before reaching the age of 30. In 1847, a young woman called Marie Duplessis lay dying of consumption in Paris. She was just 23 years old and the most fashionable courtesan in Paris. She was beautiful and brilliant, generous and sweet-natured. Franz Liszt was among her many lovers. Within 1 year of her death, another of her lovers, 24-year-old Alexandre Dumas, the younger, wrote a novel based on her life called La Dame aux Camélias, the Lady of the Camellias, which took Paris by storm. The name of the heroine was Marguerite Gautier and the hero Armand. The dramatic adaptation of the book was seen by the composer Verdi, who was inspired to compose his most famous opera, La Traviata, the Fallen One. Verdi treated the courtesan more sympathetically than did Dumas in his novel and drama. The names of the couple were now changed to Violetta and Alfredo, Verdi being Italian. So we have this phenomenon, a saintly courtesan who died of consumption, Marie Duplessis, had inspired 3 works of art. And still continues to inspire. In the 1950s, Frederick Ashton's choreography of Marguerite and Armand was also inspired by this wonderful story. And this was first danced by Dame Margot Fontaine and Rudolf Nureyev. And after their death, nobody wanted to dance that. They all refrained from dancing it till very recently when they started a revival. Even after 1882, the fascination with the disease continued, with novels and operas being written until the discovery of the magic bullet, streptomycin, by Waxman in 1943, which provided a cure for the disease. It was perhaps ironic that even after a cure was found, it so happened that as late as 1967, a wealthy woman, the beautiful actress Vivien Leigh, was dying of tuberculosis while starring in New York in a play about a wealthy woman dying of tuberculosis in Ivanov, 1889, that had been written by a wealthy physician stroke playwright dying of tuberculosis, Anton Chekhov, who died on the 15th of July, 1904. Even in the 21st century, tuberculosis has not yet been eradicated, with nearly 10 million people being infected and nearly 1.5 million dying each year. Chekhov, like Robert Louis Stevenson, died at 44 years, both having lived long enough to achieve fame and fortune, unlike the young and desperate John Keats, who died aged 25 years before gaining the fame and recognition he deserved. When young people die, it is always tragic, whether a poet or a courtesan. So it is no wonder it gave rise to the strange phenomenon of romanticizing a fatal disease. There are many more examples of how tuberculosis or consumption has been used in the creative manner in the humanities. For example, plays, short stories, painting. You would have seen the painting by Norwegian artist Edvard Munch of the sick child. But to talk about them would be more or less more of the same and require more time too. More relevant would be to ask why tuberculosis and why so popular and so frequent. Why do authors use disease as a literary device or composers in an opera? Some diseases are more useful than others. For example, syphilis was a common disease in the late 19th century, but was not used much in literature because of its negative connotations. There were certain taboos against using diseases with stigmatizing origins, although taboos can change over time, as it has with HIV/AIDS. Diseases should be picturesque. Even though consumption was a terrible illness, it was commonly used because of its presentation. Patients becoming pale and emaciated and not too disfigured and rather romantic. Then again, the disease should be mysterious. No one should know how it is spread. The origin of syphilis, on the other hand, was rather too obvious. Then again, the disease should have strong possibility for metaphor, for symbolism. TB can be symbolic of wasting away, for sensitivity, delicate nature, etc. So in all these aspects, tuberculosis fitted the bill perfectly. A creative malady like tuberculosis would be a very good tool in teaching medical humanities to students. It can include medicine, public health, literature, sociology, music, drama, opera, and even ballet. I have already mentioned earlier how Sir William Osler was one of the earliest to speak in favor of the humanities, more than 100 years ago. How, in his presidential address to the Classical Association, he compared the humanities to the hormones. I quote again, "Now the men of your guild secrete materials which do for society at large what the thyroid gland does for the individual. The humanities are the hormones. But for the average man, to infect with the spirit of the humanities is the great single gift in education." I like to think that the late Professor Carlo Fonseka would have agreed with this sentiment. He started his scientific career with growth hormone and ended his life engaged with the humanities. We should be grateful for his gift to us, for all that he did to infect us with the spirit of the humanities. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for that spellbinding oration here at the second Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities. What a morning today here at the faculty, starting from Galileo to Keats to Robert Louis Stevenson to Chekhov. And I think the next time we are in love, we are going to get ourselves tested for tuberculosis. Wonderful morning here today. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of today's proceedings with the end of the oration right now. And now I call upon Dr. Santoshi Amarasuriya to deliver the vote of thanks to wrap up today's events. Santoshi.
As we conclude the second Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration in Medical Humanities, I'm very pleased to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the faculty and the Department of Medical Humanities. In April 2016, I was tasked with the job of trying to unearth and push through at the University Grants Commission a proposal that had been previously submitted by the faculty to establish the Department of Medical Humanities. As a result, the UGC became one of my regular haunts until 9th of August that year, when I received an SMS from an official from the UGC that the establishment of the Department of Medical Humanities had been finally gazetted. From there on, the 9th of August became a very special day for us, being the anniversary of the department. We have celebrated this anniversary in various ways, ranging from recognizing the musical talents of students to conducting lecture discussions of creative works and to even establishing a novel program named Humanities. 6 years down the line, we have decided to combine our anniversary with a celebration of the life of Professor Carlo Fonseka, who was a staunch advocate and counsel of our department from its very inception. After all, what better way to celebrate the department's anniversary than by paying tribute to this key proponent of the medical humanities while exploring academic thought, conceptions, experiences, and research concerning the field. As you know, this is the second oration that we have held, and we are honored to have Professor Anuja Fernando, who has been someone who has championed the importance of the humanities in medicine for many years. Professor Fernando, as you recalled earlier, you delivered the second talk during the series of lecture discussions we organized at the very beginning of our department's journey, while Professor Carlo Fonseka delivered the first. Today, it's only fitting that you were the orator at this event. This also goes to show how we have had a very esteemed group of people who have been with us from the start, and we are very grateful to have your contributions now and in the future. Your oration on creative malady was very enlightening, and we are very grateful for it. We thank our chief guest, the Vice Chancellor of our university, Professor H.D. Karunaratne, for accepting our invitation despite his busy schedule. We also thank our Dean, Professor Vajra Disanayaka, for giving all the needed support to make this event a reality, as well as for the unstinted support he gives us at our department whenever we need it. We thank our very special invitees, Mrs. Pearl Fonseka and the family of Professor Carlo Fonseka. Professor Fonseka has created many ripples in diverse spheres, from medicine to academia in general, to the arts and even politics, touching the lives of many along the way. Therefore, as he is most near and dear, you are doubtless accustomed to the many accolades and tributes paid to his name, and we are grateful to you for helping us to also pay tribute to him through your participation at this event. As you know, this is a hybrid online on-site event, and the faculty is very fortunate to have very skilled and talented IT and AV teams capable of conducting such events and making these accessible to a wide audience. We thank them for their assistance today. We also thank our Deputy Registrar, Mr. Bandara, who, as we all know, is the man who knows how to get things done with his never-ending source of energy and perseverance. We also thank the Senior Assistant Bursa, Mrs. Himani Rajapaksa, for all the support in ensuring speedy execution of the financial matters relating to this event. A big thank you to the co-organizing team, beginning with the Oration Committee, which includes Professor Panduka Karunanayaka, for getting the ball rolling in organizing the event. I also thank our department staff for their efforts during the past few days to pull this event together. Thank you to Dr. Santusha Fernando for helping in all aspects of planning the event, including the refreshments and decor, and for being the compeer today. And to Mr. M.R.P. Prasad and Mr. Manik Tushara, our staff, for looking into the various aspects of the event. A very special thank you to our demonstrator, Shashini Pereira, for the tremendous work she did behind the scenes and for always being ever ready to carry out whatever task was given to her with great responsibility and enthusiasm. Our grateful thanks to our head, Professor Priyadarshini Galapati, who, despite being on vacation leave, gave leadership in organizing the event and was merely a telephone call away whenever we needed her help. I think the department can always be reassured that we will always have a very strong group of leading personalities to support us, whether they are on leave, near or far, or even retired. Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, who was our former head prior to his retirement, is a prime example of the latter. He continues to help us to make major strides into the future and remains the go-to person whenever we need advice regarding our activities, including this oration. We also thank him for volunteering to treat all of us today to some birthday cake to celebrate the department's birthday. In fact, it was Prof. Saroj who was ultra enthusiastic from the very beginning to always celebrate the department's birthday, and we are happy that we have continued this tradition to this day uninterrupted. We thank all the heads of department and chair professors who participated on site, as well as all our online participants who joined us today. Thank you once again, everyone.
Thank you, Santoshi. With that, we come to the end of today's proceedings of the Professor Carlo Fonseka Oration on Medical Humanities. I would like to invite the on-site participants to join us for refreshment and fellowship at the Senior Common Room. We wish you a very pleasant day ahead. Thank you.